Hi, I'm Joelle from Kicking Cancer's Ass, and this week we're focused on hope and possibility and gratitude. Early detection gives me hope. Dr. Peter Kuhn has been at the forefront of creating new ways to use blood tests, liquid biopsies, to bring early detection earlier to more women around the world. Gives me hope. I hope it gives you hope as we share an abbreviated version of our very first episode with Dr. Peter Kuhn. And thank you for being part of the Kicking Cancer's Ass community, where we're sharing stories, strategies, and science to turn the whole cancer narrative upside down and bring you power, bring you hope, and hopefully bring you great health. Thank you for being here. It's been my pleasure to bring this to you, and we're looking forward to a great 2026 when we bring our new Ask the Experts segment out and you get to provide your questions to me, and I'll put it out to the Kicking Cancer's Ass community of experts and survivors, all committed to changing the narrative and living happy, healthy, and full lives. Enjoy Dr. Peter Kuhn. Dr. Peter Kuhn is the university professor of, there's a long list here, biological sciences, medicine, biomedical engineering, aerospace and mechanical engineering, and urology. He is a founding member of the Michelson Center for Convergent Biosciences, a co-founder of the USC Michelson Center for Convergent Bioscience Bridge Institute, and director of the Convergent Science Institute in Cancer. Interestingly, Dr. Kuhn, he's not an MD, he's a physicist. Peter, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to come on Kicking Cancer's Ass and sharing your unique approach.
Thank you, Joelle. Much appreciated. I was just thinking about this morning. The first time I met you in the real world was we had assembled a group of what I think are the most brilliant minds to actually help us make progress in this problem of early breast cancer detection around a conference table. And we had all just started having our first cup of coffee. And you flew in as the last person to join. There was only one chair left. I still remember this, like at this moment in time. Chair left at the middle of the table. We had just done our introductions and naturally got to you as you sat down. And I'm like, Joelle, who are you? And I don't know whether you remember this, but you sat down and you were like, I was born to be here today.
I do remember that.
It was awesome. That was so, that level of purpose. Something that I just absolutely love about working with you and like us being in this space together of actually making a difference, because that is what I believe it actually takes for progress.
Yes. And for people listening, part of the reason I started with that is as we go around the room of luminaries that Peter assembled, we have people with multiple MDs and PhDs and people who have started massive companies and people who are experts in lab operations and how do we bring a new diagnostic to market. And I show up and, you know me, I mean, I'm a tech CMO, CRO, kind of just a person. But unlike everybody else in the room, I had a BRCA1 gene. And when we did that introduction, I hadn't yet been diagnosed with cancer. It was actually, I think, before I was actually in my own personal experience. But of course, she knew about my parents, my mother, my sister, everything else. I remember, Peter, when I told you about my diagnosis, and I said, my doctors were blown away because they looked at my MRI from June, and that was 6 months prior to diagnosis of a 9-millimeter tumor. And then they looked at the one in January and they said, there's nothing there in June. And what I remember is you were so deeply troubled that there was nothing there. And it was like a clarion call for why the work you're doing to find other ways to detect cancers is just so important.
Yeah. And again, as you know, from my own past, what bothers me the most is really that is the unknown, is the uncertainty. What I hate about cancer is the surprise. Cancer in and of itself, it's inadvertent. It's part of aging. It's part of process. So that might be unavoidable, right? But what is avoidable is really surprise, unknown, uncertainty, all of that is what we need to be able to eliminate through the process of science, right? Where I always, when I heard you say that, to me, that was the ultimate statement of the failure of science. This is not the failure of your physician. This is not the failure of you as a patient. This is not the failure of the technology that you're using. It's actually the failure of science and discovery at that front end. We haven't figured this out yet. It makes me mad to be like, why haven't we have worked, and with, as you said, with some of the best minds in the world, we have been at this and we're trying to crack this. And it's a very complicated problem, but by us coming at this from different angles, I think is how we're actually making progress in this entire world of early detection, and then understanding how do we actually deal with it as we go forward, and then projecting out into the future.
So that actually leads to a great question. You've dedicated your career to attacking this problem, to addressing this failure of science. But you're not a doctor, you're a physicist. So tell the story a little bit of what brought you to, I want to use physics and this cross-functional, cross-subject approach to cancer research. And how do you think your unique background and the way you collaborate has really changed your approach to cancer detection?
It's reading your book is actually fascinating, Joelle, right? Because it's our story is actually where we're coming from is incredibly similar. And almost the exact same age when your mother was diagnosed, my mother was diagnosed. And I think at that age, at this teenage age, you're like, I have no idea what to do with this. I know that there are emotions. I know that there are consequences. But beyond that, I'm like, I don't even know how bad, what does bad mean? And again, this was decades ago, right? So the level of knowledge was a totally different story. So as you work your way through that, you are taking in information and you're trying to understand, how do I process what's happening to my mother, what's happening in this world around me. At the same time, of course, your own life is still progressing. You became the other CMO, mind you, right? When I first read Joelle Kaufman, CMO, I'm like, oh, Chief Medical Officer, this is great. I don't know what she wants to talk to me about as a Chief Medical Officer. She should know it all, right? Like, our life progresses. And for me, that was really becoming a physicist. My older brother became a physicist, followed in his footsteps. That seemed great. Good stuff. No entrance exams. Most kids fail in the first year, and that's how you filter out. So all of that seemed to work out great. My mom's initial treatment also worked out great. She actually was part of a clinical trial of brachytherapy. We're talking, 40, 50 years ago now. And 40 years ago. And she recovered well from that. So I'm like, okay, great.
What is that? What is brachytherapy? I've not heard that word before.
Sorry, this is when radiation therapy first came about. Essentially, what happens is my mom had a lumpectomy, so the primary tumor was resected, and then essentially a set of needles were put into her breast, and focused radiation therapy was localized around where the initial tumor was. And then you go through that radiation therapy. And for her at the time, that was, in fact, the only treatment she received. Okay. It was deemed early stage. It's all of the things that I had no idea what to do with.
Right.
But after surgery, I went into the hospital, saw my mom. I viewed my primary job as just bringing sunshine into that room and making sure that negative voices stay out of the room. I viewed that as my primary job as the youngest of 4 kids. But along the way, over this next couple of weeks, then actually I started hearing like, okay, there was this medical physicist who was actually doing the calculations for the radiation therapy. Oh, cool. And I was in the middle of studying physics. I'm like, interesting. Physicists can do something useful on the medical side. That was like that initial of like, this could really be interesting. You park this. So I parked this. As I went forward, again, parallel to your construct of processing the risk of cancer. For me, it was actually processing the risk of relapse for my mom. It was the understanding of her having confidence that that cancer is gone on the one hand, but no matter where the slightest pinch was in the body, when it happened to me, I'm like, oh, I strained a muscle. Shouldn't have stayed out this long last night. Should not have lifted that many apple crates last night. Should have done this. But it doesn't occur to me that, hey, maybe I have cancer. For those of us not yet diagnosed, is really the emotions I think are actually completely impossible to actually understand. But I saw it with my mom. I could always detect it. And it took me forever to actually start wrapping my head around why is that? Right? And why is that is because the way a recurrence, that cancer coming back, that thing that really nobody wants to ever happen once you're diagnosed, is oftentimes first experienced by the patient having a pain sensation, which is sort of very similar to when you described that, how many false positive signals did you have, right? Because most of the time when you're experiencing pain, right? For my mom, for 47 years post-treatment, those were all false positives. Okay, it was only 4 years ago now, that her breast cancer actually came back. So that process of like, wow, wait a minute, we can't do any better than that? We can't nail this in any other way than waiting for pain to show up? So that is what really then, over time, started defining my own pathway in terms of going from, called as a more traditional physicist in high energy physics, a little bit on the engineering physics side. I really wanted to build cars. I really wanted to work for Porsche. There's all kinds of fun things that I really wanted to do, but started guiding me down this path of biophysics, biomedicine, not quite knowing yet what that means, but eventually getting me to this place where I am today, still on that same mission, still haven't solved that problem. It's still frustrating me because it is a problem that's incredibly difficult to solve. But in 2025, we live in a totally different world of actually starting to make real inroads in having specific tests, specific biomarkers that can help us monitor patients being free of disease, patients being at risk of disease, patients being at the verge of a recurrence of the disease. And so that is really what got me to this place where I am today. And now, is a physics degree a meaningful or useful degree? Well, I'm gonna turn that around on you, Joelle, right? I mean, this is when you came down and sat at the table, right? I'm like, hey, this is no free lunch. Okay. I need to learn from you because your CMO, that other CMO title, is actually incredibly important because we actually need to also understand people.
In the effort to understand people, I'm hoping that you can help me and anyone who's listening understand, people talk about tests like the PSA test or the Gallery test, because I think any of us who live under the specter of cancer, you and I both have lived under it as the children of survivors. I have friends who are the children of people who died from it. And the specter of cancer is terrifying. But this desire, like, hey, the PSA test, as long as your PSA is good, you don't have prostate cancer. Okay, is that the best we can do? And there's nothing like that for ovarian cancer or breast cancer. Why is this such a hard problem?
Yeah, no, I love that. No, this is great. Why on earth this shouldn't be this hard, Peter? Should it?
Come on, like it's just a blood test, right?
Yes, it should just be a blood test. Okay, so let's deconstruct this. Let's think about anatomy for the moment. What we really want to find, right, is the time point. So if we think about that early development of that cancer, the evolution from a precancerous to a cancerous lesion, that nodule, is a highly variable time period. We assume in breast cancer, it's likely years. Then you have the time period of malignant transformation, meaning something has now turned into cancer. Now it's growing locally in the breast. It's growing locally. And that is when we want to catch it. That is when we want to treat it. We can talk a little bit about also what interception would mean prior to that, right? But for the moment, let's say
That would be cool.
that would be super cool. That's cool vision stuff that we should talk about because it's a pretty amazing space as well. But this is when we want to catch it. Okay, well, so from that perspective, I was for a long period of time a very strong supporter of, hey, it doesn't make sense to detect this one in the blood because I want to detect it when it has not yet left the breast. Okay? So a blood test, if I take it that strictly, doesn't make sense. Okay, now then we did 10 years worth of research. And this is what I love about that scientific process, which sometimes drives people, of course, a little crazy that are not part of this process, right? But part of this process is truly discovering the unknown. And oftentimes, sometimes, that discovery process actually proves you wrong. In this case, it proved my hypothesis wrong that there are no early signals of cancer out in the wider blood circulation. You mentioned PSA. It's a super interesting test, right? Gets good rep, bad rep. Because as you said, right, we equate PSA with prostate cancer. The challenge is that you can have an elevated PSA for reasons other than prostate cancer. And there are some subtypes of prostate cancer that are not PSA positive. Okay, so you have the same false positive, false negative challenge that you have gone through as well. So that's what makes these tests really difficult to develop, really hard to put into the right spot. And I'm going to gallery in a moment because that's one of a suite of tests that we call multi-cancer early detection tests now. Because what happens, of course, every test has to be put in the context of the individual. And again, I'm using your own case as
Feel free.
as you've described this in your book, right? So you are as a BRCA1 carrier, as you said yourself, it is barely a question if, but when. Okay. So your single highest risk cancer, post taking care of the ovaries, was really breast cancer. Okay. So you need the most highly tuned set of tools that allow you and people like yourself, because again, good news is there is many like you, right? So we can start learning from one another, right? But you need a highly tuned set of tools that help patients like yourself prior to diagnosis and post-diagnosis. So that's the camp I live in, right? That's the camp, that's the problem I want to solve. Now, there's also, everybody is at risk of cancer, right? There's nobody who is not at risk of cancer. So we also need some broader tools, right? We need some tools that allow us to screen for cancers broadly. Now, again, we need to again recognize and appreciate that when we say breast cancer, even that is a set of half dozen different subtypes, depending on how finely I want to subset the subtypes as well, right? So this is super tricky. And what we have learned in the past is, as we traditionally we have looked for the silver bullet. We have looked for the silver bullet of finding cancer. We have looked for the silver bullet of treating cancer. What you have just said is the simplest way to think about there is no silver bullet. And this is a suite of diseases happening at a huge range of human backgrounds that define your personal risk. I'm going to come back to these multi-cancer early detection tests because I do believe that they will play an important role as we go forward in society to really be a routine test for a broad set of cancers at pretty well understood sensitivity and specificity. They will actually drive, I think, a beautiful level of clinical innovation as well. They will teach us a lot about this cancer revolution as we go forward. But what they're not meant to do is really be that finely tuned tool for women like yourself at risk of breast cancer or at risk of recurrence. So that finely tuned tool where we make use of all of the biology we possibly can about a particular cancer is where we get to just much higher precision. So in general, what you will see evolving, or what is already happening, is really a combination of tool sets. And that goes from imaging, whether that is mammography or MRIs, down to blood tests that look for particular proteins like PSA, or they look for particular pieces of DNA, or they look for cells or cell fragments as we do. In the end, all of that has to be part of this much broader tool set. And the tool set then gets assembled in a custom way for each patient to become this cancer detection pathway that has to feel absolutely natural along your standard healthcare pathway. And that, I think, is that next big level of innovation that has to make its way through research, the process of science, and then into clinical practice.
I have so many questions that come out of this, but let me start with something pretty simple. You used the words sensitivity and specificity, right? And the word precision. Now, I think those words for you are as easy as apple and orange are for everybody else, but I'm not sure those of us that aren't living in the science world and in the diagnostics world actually understand what those words mean and why they matter. So could you educate us?
No, absolutely. And so here's the beauty of the world we live in 2025. And I have an interesting relationship with the large language models. But what the large language models, whether that is the Bing Copilot or ChatGPT, what they're actually really good at is really for these types of purposes. Okay, so while I will speak to sensitivity and specificity, but it's always, this is what these models are actually great for, just asking those questions. And then you can fine tune the answer to, like, hey, up the complexity of the answer a bit or reduce the complexity. It's actually great. But to really answer your question, Joel, so sensitivity and specificity really has to do with how confident am I in the result being truly correct, or actually having overlooked something. Specificity speaks to the number of true positives, meaning that if a test says you likely have cancer, the specificity gives me how likely that is, right? So a specificity of 99% means that 99% likely that you actually have breast cancer, whatever cancer it is. Sensitivity gives me the confidence in the negative answer, meaning you're cancer free.
Okay.
Think of it as, how good is my warranty and how long is my warranty period?
Got it.
Okay. And so both of those are incredibly important because they also relate to, as a patient, what does that mean for my next step? So in breast cancer, for example, and this is always complicated when, full disclosure, Joelle said, I'm a physicist. Okay, that means I have no bedside manners. I typically live in a basement. I talk to machines and all the rest of it. Now, the last thing you want a male physicist, to do is actually talk about breast cancer and treatments. Okay, so, but
What you do.
but I do. But I do. So this is just like me apologizing if I hit something wrong, the wrong tone. Please just forgive me on that. But in breast cancer, I'll give the contrast to pancreatic cancer in a moment. In breast cancer, as a woman, you have to ask yourself, what is most important to me? Because a false positive means that you have to come back in for an additional round of imaging, as you, again, Joel, as you describe in your book, right? And you might even have to come in for an extra biopsy. And anytime somebody sticks a needle into your body, not a pleasant experience, right? And it's painful, etc., etc.
And I think even worse is it's very stressful. There's a lot of anxiety about, I have to go back. What does it mean? When will I know? And, just to put some context, I mean, mammography is a great diagnostic tool, very pro, but the level of false positives Besides the fact that it only detects 80% of the cancers, the false positives is really high. And the number of biopsies, thankfully, that come back as malignancies is fairly low. But you don't feel that or think that when your doctor calls and says, we need to have you back for a biopsy.
And this is where we get caught in this natural dilemma of math, that specificity and sensitivity relate to one another. Okay, so we both live in California. Okay, so our weather is reasonably predictable. If I now say I want to have a birthday party tomorrow and I want to do it outside, so I need nice weather. Now, if I'm going to say I must have perfect weather tomorrow, you have to guarantee me that I have perfect weather tomorrow, which is 71 degrees and sunny. I will never have that birthday party. Right? So 100% specificity is I will overlook my opportunity to have my birthday party, right? Or find that cancer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I'm paying the price on this.
This is
Sensitivity.
Perfect is the enemy of really good.
Correct. And so we have to strike that balance, but then also continue to never be satisfied. Okay, because mammography, as it has made progress, right, is only one tool in the tool set. That's why we're saying, hey, we need to build a set of blood tests that gives me a different lens into that disease. And then we can all go alongside each other to do this. I'm going to give you the counterexample on the pancreatic side, where, of course, specificity is much more complicated, right, because the biopsy is much more invasive. So in breast cancer, you can throttle specificity and sensitivity because, again, while it is anxiety driving, while it is painful, etc., the risk of physical harm is really, really low. Whereas if you actually do a biopsy of the pancreas, it's a different story. It's much more complicated. So that is this balance between sensitivity and specificity. That's why we try to establish those values very carefully, very thoughtfully. There's a lot of discussion around whether those are the best parameters, etc. But this at least gives us a description of how good a test performs in a particular setting.